Is this a step towards democracy in Sudan? Military and civilian leaders join forces to end a standoff that brought the country to a standstill. But will it stick? I'm Imran Garda, and today's newsmaker is the power-sharing deal in Sudan. It was a sight few thought they would see. Sudan's military and civilian leaders shaking hands in Khartoum. Just last month, the very same civilian leaders were accusing the military of a brutal crackdown on pro-democracy protesters. Now, for the next 3 years and 3 months, the two will work together, but not at the same time. First, Sudan will be in the hands of the military. Then they're supposed to relinquish power to a civilian government. One politician called the deal the first step towards democracy, but many are still skeptical. Yes, the compromise triggered celebrations on the streets, but others felt it was a betrayal of a revolution that toppled Omar al-Bashir. In a moment, we'll debate whether the agreement will work. But first, Abu Bakr al-Shamahi looks at how the deal came together.
Compromise. That's the name of the game after 7 long months of protest in Sudan. The different sides in this room are still wary of each other. But last week, they came to an agreement on a council that will run Sudan for the next 3 years.
The two sides have agreed to start a detailed, transparent, patriotic, independent investigation into the violent and tragic events that the country has lived through in the past few weeks. The two sides have also agreed on establishing a sovereign council headed by rotation between the military and civilians for a period of 3 years or slightly more.
This is how the agreement breaks down. The council will be made up of 5 military officers and 5 civilians, in addition to a final civilian selected by both the military and the opposition. The military will be in charge for the first 21 months, and then a civilian-run administration will take over for the next 18 months. But the military would still have a veto over the council's decisions, and elections would be held at the end of the transitional period. There's now a big choice facing pro-democracy protesters. Do they accept what many of them perceive to be a flawed deal and build on it? Or do they continue to protest?
I am sending a message to the Freedom and Change movement and to the military council. If you work well, then fine. If you do not, then look at the past 4 or 5 months. We will take to the streets for the 4th and 5th time until we find the Sudan we want to live in.
The actions of this man might help protesters make their decision. Mohammed Digalo, known as Hemedti. He may be the deputy head of the Transitional Military Council, but a lot of observers think he's ambitious and may have bigger goals.
From this podium, we are saying that if we make a mistake, we will be held accountable. I swear we will be held accountable. Every person should take their rights. If any person does not take their right, we will not advance. Dishonesty will not make us advance.
Is that the promise of a new era? Or does it lack sincerity? Under Sudan's deposed President Omar al-Bashir, his former ally, Hemedti was put in charge of the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. They're accused of human rights abuses during the war in Darfur, and Hemedti himself is accused of overseeing torture, extrajudicial killings, and mass rape. Activists now say that he's carried on with that brutality in Khartoum. This is newly emerged footage of what activists say is an attack by Hemedti's forces on the capital's main protest site on June the 3rd. The opposition says that more than 100 people were killed. This footage only comes out now after internet service was partially restored on Tuesday. The military had blocked the service for weeks. In these pictures, in the middle of the attack, one of the soldiers is heard mocking. Don't you know who the Rapid Support Forces are? It's precisely because people know who they are that has protesters wary of working with their leader. Abu Bakr al-Shamahi, the Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Khartoum is Issam Abu Hasabu. He's a senior member of the Forces for Freedom and Change, which have directly been negotiating with the military council. In Washington, D.C. is human rights advocate Azaz Ashami. And in New York is Suleiman Baldo, is the director of the Africa program at the International Center for Transitional Justice. Good to have you all on the program. Issam Abu Hassabi, is this finally good news?
Well, we hope so, yes. I think it is going to be good news as far as I can tell. The session is going on up till now, and it's not only wishful thinking, but we've worked hard, very hard, to reach this stage. Let's hope that the coming few hours will give us what we have expected so far.
What's the power dynamics like? Ultimately,
Yes.
as you're sitting with them and talking to them, is it clear that the Transitional Military Council truly calls the shots still, and that power is theirs to give to you?
No, I think the guiding principle is that it's a mutual interest that we have agreed. One of the guiding principles of the draft of the agreement was that both parties will consider the venturing into a period of mutual understanding, of mutual commitment. So I don't think it's the power of the TMC, the Military Council, to give to us. It's more of understanding and evaluating a situation that will take more than one-man show.
I see.
That there is no such legitimacy of one party, that both of us, the Military Council and the civilians, have to consider the period as mutual responsibility. So it's not about giving or taking power. Yes, the whole question is about shift of the balance of power between the two parties, but we have reached a stage that we think we understand fully the commitments and the responsibilities of this period.
Okay. Azaz Shami, our guest in Khartoum, who's involved in this process, is optimistic. Are you as optimistic?
Not at all. And it's quite hard for me to see why he is so optimistic about that. First of all, from whatever we've seen since this very bare minimum agreement that they agreed on last week, we haven't seen any actions on the part of the TMC that shows that they are going to be relinquishing any power of any sort. One of the major demands that the people on the street had was basically to have accountability for the crimes that happened in Khartoum. Though it's very limited in its scope and it's only centralized in the elite area, but even that one, Al-Burhan already said they already have done an investigation and at the same time denied having any responsibility. Then Hemedti on the other side saying that we found other people. All that while their spokesperson statement on the 13th of June is still alive on the net, him saying that yes, we did order the dispersing of the protesters, but something gone wrong and we're sorry about that.
Okay.
So it's quite interesting to me to see how the people in Sudan see that.
Right.
It would be better for FFC just to be very true to itself and just confess that they were forced to this agreement instead of trying to sell it to us.
I see.
Because I don't think it's any one of us is buying that.
Okay, we're going to get a response from Issam in a moment, but let me ask Suleiman Baldo, using the example of the killings of the protesters, it was really terrible. Isn't it an indication, perhaps, that these opposition leaders and the protesters can't really trust the Transitional Military Council when they're saying, well, as Azaz said, well, we looked into it and guess what? We found that we're not to blame for people being shot dead and dumped into the Nile. Is this a Transitional Military Council that you can trust?
Let's take a step back and look on what is making the military council members tick. Let us remember, these are the commanders of Sudan's security and defense sector agencies, National Police, National Intelligence Security Service, the Army, Rapid Support Forces. We are talking about transitioning Sudan from 30 years of mass atrocities war crimes, crimes against humanity in Darfur, in all conflict areas, South Kordofan, Blue Nile, and what happened in Khartoum on the 30th of June and before that since December 2018 is a form of unlawful killing beyond the rules and laws of Sudan and international treaties to which Sudan is party. Therefore, it adds to a long legacy of criminal conduct for which the Military Council and the heads of the security and defense agencies are trying to shield themselves. This is a primary consideration in their calculation. It's not just about the investigation into the killing of protesters on June 30th. The other motivation, I would say, is to preserve the autonomy of the security and defense agencies that they have obtained under 30 years of the regime of Omar al-Bashir at the level of the national economy. During these 3 decades, security agencies have benefited from more than 70% of the expenses of the national budget. However, they were allowed to keep the revenue. Most of the agencies, with the exceptions perhaps of the customs, national customs are part of the national police, they manage the revenues from this economic power away and off the budget, of the national budget.
Okay.
The security and defense sector control this, and the military members of the Sovereign Council are going to fight tooth and nail also to preserve that autonomy and the autonomy of the
two interesting perspectives here. Okay, so 2 threads there, right? So Suleiman, you've got 2 threads there. On the one hand, on the security side, and on the other hand, in terms of how much these people are invested in the old system and retaining their privileges. Issam Abu Hassabu, you're outnumbered here because the other 2 guests are extremely cynical of this deal and skeptical. They're hopeful, they want things to work, but they're asking many, many questions, and these are legitimate questions, you would agree?
Yes, definitely I agree that these are very much legitimate questions, very much practical, very much cautious. But it's not, as I said earlier, it's not about wishful thinking. It's about an agreement, that there has been this contentious relationship between the 2 parties, between the TMC and the FFC. And it's probably, as I said earlier, a matter of shift of power. But we have an agreement that was proposed by the mutual or the joint proposal by the AU and Ethiopia. So we have this on our hands. We have to work on this. It's not about indicting or clearing anybody or pardoning them. It's about looking at a map that is very, very meticulously complicated.
Okay,
we have to.
Issam, sorry to interrupt you. And listen, there's about a 3 or 4 second delay between us.
On what we have on our hands.
Yeah. There's about a 3 or 4 second delay between us, so this might get a little bit messy. So my extreme apologies for interrupting. However, you're saying it's not about indicting or pardoning, but at the very least, don't have these people in government. At the very least, if somebody is accused of a crime, if somebody is accused of atrocities in Darfur or even very recently in Khartoum, at the very least, you don't want them as part of this rotating 3-year-long governing council. Just let them stay at home in their pajamas. Why should they be leading the country?
Then we shouldn't have sat with them in the first place. I mean, the FFC chose to sit and negotiate through the mediator. So unless we go on with this pragmatic attitude, then it's a game of Tom and Jerry. We cannot really be serious and sit and discuss matters of justice, of peace, of the future of the country, and then in the middle of the road, we stop and say, but these guys are not the suitable ones to sit in and share power with us.
Azaz? Okay, so let's get a response from Azaz.
I think we need to go on all the way.
You believe you need to be pragmatic. Yeah. Okay, Azaz?
Okay, I don't know where to start with this. First of all, I think the reason the FFC had to sit in this negotiation, this ill-fate with zero commitment on the part of TMC, is because they did a series of mistakes leading up to this moment. So it's not the pragmatic thing, it's actually the best they can get. This is one. Second, the TMC, as Dr. Suleiman said, it's an extension of the NCP of the al-Bashir regime. Ironically, most of the parties making up FFC had deals at some point with the Bashir government and fell out of it because they did not get what they were promised, because they were found out that they were played out. And so it's really interesting that the same people and the same parties who had made deals with this government before, like miraculously now think this same government will ever stick to the end of the deal. Whatever that deal is, we haven't seen anything, by the way. It's very, very, very bare minimum. What we see now on the dynamics of the news for us as Sudanese citizens is the TMC making all these like sovereign decisions, appointing people to new offices, moving diplomats from one position to the other, making all these, calling all the shots, and at the same time, the FFC is just being wishful and helpful, like acting like, oh no, we're the bigger one, we're going to do that. But actually, I don't see them having any power to this. Let's look into the recent statements by the TMC head. Burhan literally said that they're going to have their military soldiers in cities around civilians until their their terms is ended. So that's not a civilian-led.
Right.
Again, and also they didn't tell us what is this sovereign council going to have. We hear from the TMC that they can veto the cabinet nomination. Well, apparently we're not in a civilian-led.
So let's ask Issam, the fact that they said, hey, we have to have a military commander in charge for the first 21 months, that's the first thing we need to do. You have no qualms about that?
We do, of course. But again, I'm sorry I have to repeat what I've already said, but this is a critical situation where you have to be pragmatic, where you have to get what you can really get. This is a very critical situation. Again, I think that unless we get the final agreement in a few hours' time and look into it, we cannot predict what we have gained and what we have lost. We are guarded by a document that is the proposal of the settlement, and its articulations are clear, and there are guiding principles in this agreement.
Right.
One of them is the guarantor of the AU and resolution number 854. I mean, it's a critical situation. Yes, we have to.
Okay,
we
I
have
want to get
go
Suleiman
through
Baldo.
it. But sit back and reluctantly.
Okay.
Reluctantly deny everything. That's not right.
No, we're unpacking it, right? So there's an agreement and we're unpacking it, and we're asking if this is the best deal to bring about peace and a transition to democracy. Suleiman Baldo, what are you most skeptical about with regards to this deal?
I'm not skeptical, I'm not an optimist. The freedom and change forces come to the table not as freedom and change forces, that is to say political and civil society actors. They come propelled by deeply rooted Sudanese population revolution in which all sectors of the society have participated, and they have mandated freedom and change forces to represent their aspirations. What the Sudanese people want is dismantling of the legacy of 30 years of repressive rule of Omar al-Bashir and all the instruments and the systems and the networks that have been introduced of repression, of war crimes. It's a violent system meant to protect the interests of a particular political constituency.
But Suleiman, okay, so the counter argument, Suleiman, the counter argument is that so they are so deeply invested in the state, in the money, and as beneficiaries of all the architecture of Sudan that you can't get rid of them. If you try to get rid of them, they'll bite back in a very repressive way. So you need to work with them and transition to democracy. That's the argument.
This is not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that the best chances for this agreement, when we have it to succeed, is the protection of the population around it, so that no one, whoever that person or entity is allowed to retreat from the aspirations of the people. Dismantling a system of repression, of massive corruption, and of atrocity crimes accepted without accountability. There has to be real serious reform, and the freedom and change forces are the guardians of these aspirations. If they fail in that assignment, they will be abandoned.
But there's a suggestion, Suleiman, there's a suggestion from Issam that by trying to engage in accountability at this moment in time, it fiddles with the pragmatism and makes things difficult because you can't put people on trial when you're trying to stabilize the situation. That's the suggestion. Address that for us.
Well, they dropped it altogether. They dropped the whole accountability question.
Okay, Suleiman, have a go, and then Azaz. Suleiman?
Yes, for me, this is not a matter that can be settled and handled overnight. It's not about the here and now. It's about what is our plan for the 3 years of the transition, what is our plan for safeguarding the objectives of the people's uprising. It's not about the political agenda of the freedom and change forces. It's about the agenda of change and of dismantling of a system of corruption and of repression, and holding people accountable criminally and economically for the massive theft of the resources of Sudan.
Right.
This cannot be done overnight. It has to be through very patient and very strategic work of freedom and change forces. And this is the challenge facing them. If they go into the intricacies of day-to-day politics and power play with the military, we are going to step into the wrong footing.
Okay, noted.
What we need is more of a strategic thinking
and that's understood.
Really
Got
preparing
it.
for the real challenge.
Azaz, if you were given executive privileges here, if you were given more power than Omar al-Bashir had at the height of his powers, at this moment in time, what would you do to put Sudan on the true road to democracy? What would you do differently to what's already been done in this power-sharing deal?
I'll go back to before June 3rd and see and inject some pragmatism into FFC to sign that agreement then, and instead of waiting and make it dipped in blood like now. It's very hard for me to take this as pragmatism. This is not pragmatism, that you're succumbing to power and pressure. Let's call it what it is, because when you walk into a landmine, knowing it is a landmine, you will be less prone to be blown up. But when you walk into a landmine thinking that it's a golly beautiful garden, you're going to be shred to pieces. This TMC has zero interest in fulfilling the end of its agreement. Today, most of the videos that have been leaking since yesterday, since the internet came back, we see people in official uniforms hitting people, terrorizing them to say which rule you want, military or civilian, madaniya wala askariya, and terrorizing them. If their own ranks and file don't think that madaniya should stand a chance and they are willing to kill for it, I cannot trust their heads and their superior. Let's face it, this agreement will not bring us any stability. We're going to be dragging our feet. They're going to be dragging and stalling and give us bits and pieces. And as to what the agreement holds, I'm sure there's no surprises. The agreement was very simple. It was bare minimum. It was bare. So I don't think anyone in FFC should see see any surprises. What's happening now is turning that agreement into a legal form and into a legal language. But the essence of it is not new. So I'm sorry, if someone in FFC does not know what the agreement entails, that means that even the transparency within themselves is quite flawed. But there's no surprises. The deal says simply that the TMC is going to have the 21st month, and then the civilian during that time in which they're going to have probably the head of the TMC, and also going to have power to name and veto the FFC cabinet. So to me, in my book, that's not a civilian role. What this does, it just gives the international community to relax a little bit, keep their interest with the TMC that they had built over the years, and at the same time, they respond to a popular movement and they try to cool the streets, and that's it. That's not democracy. It's just getting off the radar.
Okay. Very finally, Essam, you think it's a nice cuddly teddy bear, but Azaz says you're about to pick up a landmine.
No, I never said it's a nice cuddly teddy bear. Maybe it's a tiger. It's a vicious animal. But the thing is that when I talked about pragmatism, because I live inside. I mean, I know exactly what we have on our hands. We don't have that much. We have to work with what we have now. Now, if we're talking about negotiations, then we know that we cannot enforce our side of the story as easy as it sounds, as the lady says. We are in a situation where we are compelled to fight with what we have, with what instruments we have, irrespective of the outcome. Now, the situation is irreversible. We chose to sit and talk and negotiate. And now we have a document on our hands. We believe that gradually we can sustain what we have, and this is very important, and we can build on it. This is a strategy that we are adopting.
Okay, so we're going to give it.
For instance,
we're going to give it the time.
The lady said that the TMC has.
Yeah, listen, Essam, I've got to move on, right? But we're going to give it the time it needs to see if it works. I'm going to have you back on the program, and you guys can have this discussion again. We won't take our eyes off Sudan. I've got to move on, but I thank you all for joining us. Essam, Sulaiman, and Azaz, thanks again. It was a deal 17 years in the making. 54 countries in Africa just launched a continent-wide free trade agreement. It has the potential to become a $3 trillion economic bloc, and it's hoped it'll be a financial game changer. In recent years, less than 20% of trade on the continent has been between African countries. Europe, on the other hand, is close to 70%. So many hope this historic deal is the key to unlocking the continent's economic potential. But why are some convinced it's destined to fail? Haider Abbasi explains.
Oil is a major export for Nigeria. It's helped the country become the biggest economy in Africa. That's why Nigeria's last-minute decision to sign up to a new free trade area was crucial. The African Continental Free Trade Zone was launched this week in Niger. It will be the largest free trade area, second only to the World Trade Organization.
It's the biggest historical event for the African continent since the creation of the Organization of African Unity in 1963. It's an event that gives hope for the construction of a united and prosperous Africa.
The African Free Trade Zone will include 54 countries, 1.3 billion people, and will create a $3.4 trillion economic bloc. Eritrea is the only country that hasn't signed up. The project will allow people, goods, and services to move freely. In theory, this means no more red tape and the elimination of tariffs. There's also hope it'll create more jobs and income. So why is this happening? Compared to other continents, there's not much trade among African countries. In Europe, 70% of nations do business with each other, and in Asia it's more than half. But in Africa it's only 16%. The African Union hopes the new trade zone will expand this to 60% by 2022.
We are now walking on the right track towards a bright future. The launch of the free trade area opens a new window for development and progress instead of economic stagnation and conflicts.
It took years of talks to persuade most countries in Africa to sign up, and analysts say it'll take many more to actually implement the trading bloc. And other challenges remain. Not all countries in Africa are connected. Roads and rail infrastructure remain poor. There are also security issues. Conflicts are being fought across the continent. Governments are concerned they'll lose revenue when tariffs are eliminated. And analysts say big economies like Nigeria and South Africa won't benefit as much as smaller ones. So far, only half the countries that have signed up have ratified the agreement. It begs the question, can the new trade zone live up to the hype and transform Africa? Haider Abbasi, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now in Nairobi is David Owiro. He's the founder of the Africa Development Think Tank. Good to have you on the program, David. So, this decision to finally go ahead with this Africa Free Trade Agreement, the vast majority of nations have signed up to it. Is this the game changer that they're making it out to be?
Yes, certainly it is. As you know, trade is a big enabler for achieving economic development. And any efforts that governments take to bring down tariffs and non-tariff barriers actually turns out to be quite positive for economic development and indicators such as wealth creation and even employment opportunities. And so this drive by African nations to have a continental-wide free trade agreement is actually quite laudable. As you might know, Africa, the trade within Africa, intra-African trade, is currently standing at about 18%. Mm-hmm. And given that Africa trades mostly its manufactured good within itself, this might actually be, the panacea to solving our industrialization dream.
Right. So intra-regional trade among African countries, about 18%, as you said, whereas it's about 60% for Asia, about 70% for Europe, right? So they're not trading amongst themselves and with each other. They're trading and exporting to other countries, which leads me to ask, aren't the Chinese going to go, hey, hold on, guys? Aren't the Americans going to say, well, hold on, we cornered this market. You can't trade with each other. You're taking our business away from us.
Well, that's not expected because the pattern of trade is very different. As I've just stated, the trade happening within Africa and amongst African nations is mostly in the value-added goods. And if you compare that with the kind of trade that happens between, say, China and Africa, vis-a-vis China and US and Europe, is mostly on raw commodity exports. And so these tend to be, your agricultural goods, your mineral resources, and so on and so forth. And, with regards to China, actually, we do import a lot of finished products from China. And so we actually have a big imbalance between Africa and China.
Right.
But regards to what we actually do export to China is actually quite minimal. And so there is no competition and there might not be any dispute.
Okay. One of the criticisms of NAFTA, for example, in the Americas is that it seems to be heavily loaded towards the most powerful nation there, the United States. Are we going to see something like this being dominated by Nigeria, by South Africa, maybe even Egypt, because there are major disparities when it comes to the economies of these countries and the rest of the continent?
Certainly, that is a major risk that, in any trading configuration, when you have large economies partnering up with small economies, there's always the risk of job displacements and job moving from the more advanced economies down to the less advanced economies. And so I think the drafters and the negotiators of the framework are the ones who have to put in place measures so that they're able to protect the vulnerable economies and the economies that are still at the lower stages of growth, because there still is something to be said about the benefits that such a trading framework can put in place. So certainly there are usually some welfare gains amidst welfare losses with regards to jobs and FDI, which is foreign direct investments that are attracted to or that are invested in the smaller economies. But ultimately, in the long run, everybody benefits whenever there's such a trading arrangement.
Right. And if we take two countries, for example, so say we take Botswana in the south, which is a democracy, which is stable, things are generally run in a fair, relatively equal way. And we take maybe Mauritania up in the north, and we say there's trade between the two. When there's free trade in Botswana, are we going to see more likely benefiting Botswanan citizens? But when we see Mauritania opened up to that same sort of free trade, isn't that going to just enrich and empower the small dictatorial elite at the top of that country? Is that just a natural consequence of this?
Certainly, the pattern of trade and what can be sort of implied through the trade implications across the economy do to a large extent depend upon the domestic structure of the economy. And so when you have a given number of countries, and the expectation is that the countries which would benefit most would be the ones whose trade policy and trade frameworks work best within those environments. And so if you have, in the two examples you've given, Mauritania, where you've got hegemony and there isn't really a free economy as such, and it's largely dependent on, say, existing networks, whether political or family networks, the benefits of free trade then will not be felt, equally by everyone in that economy. And so if you contrast that with countries such as Botswana, which has perhaps a more freer economy, where you have benefits of trade accruing almost across all the ranks of the economy, then you would begin to see a contrast in terms of who benefits most, in a given trading environment such as this one that is to be put in place.
If we had to look at the biggest hindrance to this getting off the ground or working smoothly across the continent, and yes, countries vary within the continent, but would that be corruption and bad governance, or would it be something as simple as infrastructure that can't be relied on consistently enough?
Actually, from the regional economic community's experience and practice that we are seeing, because as you know, the continent already has various regional economic configurations. So we've got the East African community in East Africa, we've got the ECOWAS within West Africa, and we've got the Southern African Customs Union within South Africa. And what we are seeing even within those regional communities, in spite of their existing more advanced stages of economic integration, the challenges of cross-border trade still persist. And so the challenges we still see are things such as outright bans, where a small economy might just put a ban on products coming from a larger economy to protect its citizens. And in addition to that, we see various very explicit and often intrusive customs procedures that are not in harmony. And so this sort of raise the cost of doing business. And so and all this cascade upwards to the putting in place sort of an inconsistent trading environment. And so as investors, it becomes then very difficult to make investment decisions just because of the challenges that do exist in spite of there being regional economic communities.
Right.
And so for me, the big challenge that perhaps having in place a continental-wide regional economic community, will be really to take the lessons in terms of the challenges that we're already seeing from the regional economic communities and trying to apply and resolve those challenges at the continental level.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned them because they do also roll off the tongue, right? So when we talk of COMESA or ECOWAS or SADC or whatever, and with this one, I don't even know how to say it, right? So I've been trying not to say. So it's capital A, small f, capital C, F, T, A. Do you know how to say it? Have you heard anybody even try to say it? Because that's probably the biggest problem with this thing. It's a horrible acronym. How do you say it? Do you know?
I don't know. Even me, it's a tongue twister.
Yeah. Just big picture. Yeah.
You know, I think
they need. I think they need to work on that. They should hire me as a consultant and come up with another acronym. But just very finally, anytime we see African leaders come together and say, "Hey, we need to work together and we need to engage in trade and not aid, and we need to do business with each other," does that mean that things are moving in the right direction?
Yes, so certainly there's a change and a shift in the policy leadership that we have on the continent. We have an AU Agenda 2063, which espouses African priorities, and amongst those are to not only create a continental-wide movement so that we have better economic development within national countries, but also to lay the infrastructure requirements of the continent, as well as putting in place, modernization of the agricultural sector. And so this it does sort of indeed seem to be a better leadership, and there does indeed seem to be an honest push for addressing the key challenges of the continent.
David Owiro, good to have you on the Newsmakers. Thank you very much for joining us.
We appreciate all those who supported this initiative, and this is a big day for Lamu people. It's a big day for Kenya, it's a big day for Africa, and it's a big day for the world.
After more than a year of petitions and protests, Kenya has been forced to halt plans to build its first ever coal-fired power plant. The campaign group Decolonize took the country's National Environment Management Authority to court for approving the plant's construction on the Lamu archipelago. The seaside town is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and critics warned building the Chinese-funded plant would destroy the area's natural beauty. A judge agreed, and a National Environmental Tribunal ruled that the firm building the plant had failed to do a proper environmental assessment. But those defending the plant have about 2 weeks left to appeal. So, is the fight really over? Well, one of those who fought against the plant is Samia Omar Bwana. She's a board member of the Decolonize Kenya campaign. Good to have you on the program once again. Samia, you spoke to us a year ago when you were fighting. Now, the judges have halted it, but it's not a clear victory yet, is it?
Not really, because all they've done is say the project is suspended until the project proponents can do a new EIA study. However, the power purchase agreement between the Kenya government and Amu Power is still there. It's a 25-year agreement, and unless both parties pull out of it, actually Kenyans are fixed to pay $360 billion per year, whether or not the project goes on. So we hope they pull out.
Would it be embarrassing for the Kenyan government to still continue even though the judges ruled against them?
I think it's already embarrassing, and unless somebody hasn't read the news, it's quite embarrassing, because not only have the courts decided, but even UNESCO, as of Monday, the World Heritage Committee made a decision to cite that the government of Kenya hasn't done enough to do assessments in order to make sure that the project is not going to have the right impact. A lot of potential investors that they were expecting by now would be contributing towards a plant haven't. That includes General Electric, the African Development Bank. These are all potential investors that they had talked of that have already contributed, but in true essence, they haven't.
Right. So a lot of very powerful people and institutions stand to lose a lot of money by cancelling this project. With that in mind, tell me a little bit about the battle and the resistance you came across.
Yeah, I think the biggest battle has really been for the community in the grassroots. because for us who are focusing on the national campaign, it's easy to kind of shut yourself out and focus on the activism on the global scale. But in the grassroots, we have some of the local activists from Save Lamu who have actually been leading that campaign, have been arrested, have been harassed. It was quite a struggle for them for many years. Even they've not received positive acceptance from some of their friends and the political allies. Some have had fallouts. So it's more direct threat to the grassroots community. For us as a national campaign, it's still a challenge. We had a demonstration a couple of weeks ago where we actually couldn't complete the demonstration. We weren't allowed to proceed on to the Chinese embassy because of influence and power from the police. So I think...
So the police made it difficult for you to demonstrate?
Yeah, they stopped the demonstration halfway.
You're called Decolonize. You're not called Save a UNESCO World Heritage Site or Save Lamu, right? So with that in mind, is this all about the environment, or is it a mix of the specific fragility of Lamu plus the environment?
Actually, decolonize, as you rightly put, it's more about being against coal and pro-renewable energy. And that's because although the Lamu coal power plant is currently the biggest planned power plant, there have been talks about starting coal power plant in Kwale. There have been talks about starting one in Kitui. There is currently a proposed coal mining project in Kitui County, and there are other proposed mining projects in other counties. So we're about actually being anti-coal in general and supporting renewable energy projects.
Right. The government's saying we have critical energy needs. Coal is a simple, easy answer. We can do business quickly and get things up and running. I guess I'm not going to ask you to provide solutions here. You're not the energy minister, but do you have sympathy for that perspective?
I see where that argument is coming from, if only it was valid. The thing is, coal used to be cheap many years ago, but now with all the subsidies for renewable energy, furthermore, considering the stringent rules that require a lot of mitigation plans. So if you account for environmental mitigation and the payments the institution, the private sector has to give to their staff for health insurance and all that coverage, it's actually more expensive. So calling it cheap is only when looking at superficially. As a matter of fact, the Institute for Energy and Energy Economic and Financial Analysis in the US analyzed a research project by the government of Kenya called the Least Cost Power Development Plan that actually looked at the cost of the project. And in fact, the actual cost predicted by the proponents was 0.7 cents, but it's actually 10 times more. It's over-exaggerated how cheap coal is. Okay. It's actually not cheap.
So you believe it's, well, I'm not saying you believe, but the available evidence shows that it's dirty and it's expensive. Okay.
It's very expensive.
So there's a political element to this. On the continent, people say, well, the Chinese are investing. Be nice to the Chinese because we need Chinese investment. You've taken on the Chinese indirectly here and you've won temporarily. What does that mean politically?
Yeah, I think one, we conflate the Chinese a lot, but the investors, Power China, a private investment company, and ICBC, the Chinese bank, is a private company. But the government itself of China is actually anti-coal. They're closing down the coal power plants. They're giving subsidies to renewable energy. So as a government of China, we've actually been pleading with them. The campaign had a meeting with the Chinese ambassador to Kenya last week, Friday, which was very positive. And he made it very clear that it's the people of Kenya, the government of Kenya, that will decide its own fate, while the private sector is deciding to go on with the coal power plant. As an institution, as a government institution, as a national policy in China, they are against coal.
If these guys appeal, and then they can convince the judges that they factored in the environmental assessment, this won't be too damaging, too harmful, they're going to create jobs, and this is needed to power the local community at the very least, what do you do then?
There's a lot to be done. One, our argument isn't only on the environment, that's maybe 30% of it, but we have the financial angle, where we actually are arguing with the Energy Regulation Commission that this does not make any financial sense. And the legal institutions in Kenya, the National Environmental Tribunal is a first step. You actually have the High Court, you have the Supreme Court, and you also have international courts that handle such cases, especially the environmental courts of Kenya, which we actually haven't even gone to yet in case they appeal.
Okay, so you have a lot of tools to play with.
A lot of tools to play with.
You're going to keep on fighting.
And some under the belt. I won't reveal.
Okay, great. To be revealed later on the show. Samia Bwana, good to have you on the program again.
Thank you.
That's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, we debate the resignation of the UK's ambassador to the US. Can diplomats do their jobs if what they say behind closed doors is not protected? Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.